This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to the Piano Maven podcast by going to the link in our episode description to my Substack page, and paid subscribers get goodies such as free downloads at the beginning of each month, and from time to time we will have Zoom meetings where we can all meet and talk about our piano obsessions. So please consider subscribing to the Piano Maven to keep this podcast alive and afloat and in production. I haven't yet done an episode about the great Chilean-born pianist Claudio Arrau, who lived from 1903 until 1991. I certainly have written about Arrau frequently, not only reviewing his recordings, of course, but I also wrote a portrait of Arrau for Gramophone many years ago, and I've written the booklet notes for the Marston Labels edition of Arrau's pre-war 78s, and for Sony BMG's edition of Claudio Arrau's complete RCA Victor and Columbia Masterworks recordings. I wrote those notes too. Although Claudio Arrau is known for amassing a very large and Catholic repertoire, as he got older, he slowly but surely narrowed his scope and sharpened his focus. So by the time he turned 80 in 1983, Arrau mainly was concentrating in concert on Beethoven, with a choice selection of works of Liszt and Chopin and Brahms and Debussy. Yet one composer whom Arrau had seemed to resist for years was Mozart. It wasn't that he could not play Mozart. We have plenty of evidence of his Mozartian prowess, most memorably from that large-scaled and very operatically oriented 1956 Salzburg Mozart recital that was issued on the Orfeo label. The late Frida Rothy was Arrau's manager, and after Arrau died, I got to meet her, and we would meet for lunch from time to time. I once asked her why Arrau seemed to resist Mozart, and she said that, it's because Arrau found that it was challenging to memorize Mozart more than other composers, and he wouldn't play anything in public that he couldn't really memorize. Now, Arrau did make one studio Mozart disc for Philips in 1973, I think, consisting of the C minor Fantasy, Kerschel 475, and the Sonata in C minor, Kerschel 457, that are usually played together. The disc also contained the Rondo in A minor and the D minor Fantasy. But it wasn't until maybe a decade later that Arrau began revisiting Mozart again on disc. First, with a release that came out on LP that included the sonatas in B-flat, Kerschel 570, and the D major sonata, Kerschel 576, and the Adagio in B minor. And in the Adagio, he played this piece in a slow and massive and serious manner with all repeats, stretching the music out to almost 16 minutes. And soon after, Arrau was involved recording the rest of the Mozart sonatas. He wasn't playing Mozart in public, but he was recording Mozart. These late Mozart recordings generally got mixed reviews and some outright negative reviews. I found myself oddly drawn into these interpretations. And when Arrau's Philips Mozart cycle eventually appeared in a box set on CD, I remember listening to the performances again, and then I wrote a review of them for ClassicsToday.com, which pretty much sums up my feelings about these recordings. And I'm going to reiterate what I said in that review, if that's okay with you, because my opinions really haven't changed over the years. Basically, if you want Mozart's piano sonatas played with the customary limpid grace, surface charm, consistently steady rhythms, elegant fingerwork, and scintillation that you get from pianists so diverse as Mitsuko Ushida, Lily Krauss, Andras Schiff, Robert Levin, Maria João Pires, and Roberto Proceda, just to name so many who've recorded Mozart over the years, and whose cycles are definitely reference-worthy. You probably won't like Claudio Arrau's Mozart. Most of these recordings were made when Arrau was in his 80s, and he takes each and every phrase super seriously, and he reads between the lines by way of emphatic accents and all kinds of rhetorical asides. Now, do these gestures stem from eroding agility on Arrau's part or just dogged intention? To be honest, I'm not always so sure. But in any event, this is most decidedly Mozart playing of a confrontational kind, where an operatic sensibility looms over every inflection and every gesture, with each dissonance and passing tone kind of magnified. In other words, this is not easy listening. And furthermore, the sonic capabilities of the instruments of Mozart's time pale next to the full-throated and burnished sonority and huge dynamic range that the aged Claudio Arrau could still coax out of a Steinway modern concert grand. And Arrau being Arrau, of course, you have to expect that all of the ornaments will be played on the beat and that he will observe each and every repeat. As I often have written about Arrau in other contexts, you really cannot listen to this pianist with a casual ear. You have to work with him side by side, whether plumbing the B minor adagio for its neo-Brahmsian allusions and implications, which I think are there in the score, or finding plausible, tragic undertones that no one else bothers with in the Kerschel 330, 279, 333, and 576 first movements. Arrau always loved to talk about this or that composer's proximity to death, and he probably justified his approach to these particular sonata movements by citing Mozart's proximity to death. Arrau's technique is admittedly suaver in the aforementioned C minor Fantasy Sonata from 1973, plus the A minor Rondo and D minor Fantasy from those sessions. But he's no less serious. He's really channeling Mozart through Beethoven in those recordings, but I think it works on its own terms. In the 1980s recordings, you can hear Arrau's fingernails appear to be clicking on the keys, but the sound quality throughout these Mozart recordings is consistently plush and warm and ripely detailed. I originally likened much of Arrau's late-period Mozart to both the flaws and the insights of Maria Callas's best late-period recordings. And I think there's some truth to that analogy still. So I suggest that one savors Claudio Arrau and Mozart, but in small doses, as if you were imbibing bitter yet undeniably potent vintage spirits. Again, like I said before, this ain't easy listening, but those who persist will probably be rewarded. I still find this to be a fascinating Mozart cycle with Claudio Arrau. It's not one that I would recommend as your first choice. For my first choice, I would choose Roberto Proceda on Decca, and for a period instrument cycle, I'd choose Robert Levin's on ECM. And for a safe regulation model, go for Clara Wirtz and her Mozart cycle issued by Brilliant Classics. But there is a lot of potency and food for thought in Claudio Arrau's ever so fascinating Mozart cycle for Phillips, which is, of course, on Decca. So think about it and try it out. See what you think, and I'd be very curious to see how you respond to Arrau's Mozart. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And I look forward to you and I being together for the next episode.